The wind cut like a blade, sharp, relentless, carrying the scent of old ash and frozen decay. Gabriel had learned to live with it, just like he had learned to live with everything else in this broken world. Alone. He sat near the fire, rolling his knife between calloused fingers, staring into the flickering embers as if they held answers. They never did. The fire was weak, barely enough to push back the encroaching cold, but it was better than nothing. His supplies were dwindling. The last good scavenging run had been nearly a week ago, and the storm that had rolled in 2 days prior had made hunting impossible. He exhaled, watching the breath leave his lips in a pale mist. This was life now, a slow, grinding fight for survival. It hadn't always been like this. Once, Earth had been teeming with billions of people, their cities stretching toward the sky, their technology pushing them further into the stars. And then, everything fell apart. He wasn't sure exactly how it started. No one was. Maybe it was the wars. Maybe it was the famines that followed, or the rising seas swallowing entire coastlines. Maybe it was the plague, the one that left bodies piled in the streets, turning once thriving metropolises into graveyards. Or maybe, just maybe, it was when they left. The aliens. Not invaders, not conquerors. They hadn't come to exterminate humanity. If anything, they had been Earth's last chance. Advanced beyond comprehension, they arrived when humanity was already standing on the edge of a knife. They offered medicine, clean energy, food production techniques that could have saved billions. But it was too late. Humans did what humans always did, turned on each other. The wars got worse. Some saw the aliens as saviors, others saw them as a threat. In the end, it didn't matter. One day, they were simply gone, vanished into the sky, leaving the broken remnants of humanity to tear itself apart. Gabriel had been a soldier back then. Not a hero, not a leader, just another man following orders, trying to survive the collapse. He had outlived his squad, outlived his unit, outlived the war itself. Now, he was just another survivor, wandering through the ruins of a world that had already given up. Which was why, when he heard footsteps stumbling, uneven, his first instinct was to grab his rifle. His body moved before his mind had fully processed the sound. He kicked dirt over the fire to dampen its glow, then dropped to one knee, aiming toward the darkness beyond the tent's entrance. The night was thick, shadows stretching long across the wasteland. He strained his ears, listening. A figure emerged. At first he thought it was just another scavenger, a fool lost in the storm, but as she stepped forward, swaying unsteadily, the firelight caught her skin, and his breath caught in his throat. Not human. Her skin was deep violet, smooth yet strangely luminous, as if light passed just beneath the surface. Slashes and burns marred her exposed arms, and her long dark hair clung to her face in damp, tangled strands. The remains of some kind of bodysuit clung to her frame, sleek and black with faint silver seams running along its surface. It looked advanced, maybe a survival suit, though it was in tatters, useless against the cold. She took another step forward, her legs trembled, then she collapsed. Gabriel didn't move. His heart pounded in his ears as he kept the rifle trained on her unmoving form. An alien, a real one. His fingers tightened on the trigger. For years they had been nothing more than ghosts in old stories. Boogeymen. Myths. Some believed they had abandoned Earth out of mercy. Others thought they had left because humanity wasn't worth saving. Either way, they were gone. And now, one was here, alone, injured. A trick? A trap? He didn't know. But she was dying. Gabriel exhaled sharply through his nose, cursing under his breath. Slowly he lowered the rifle and approached. She was light, far too light. When he knelt beside her, he could see the delicate rise and fall of her chest, shallow and weak. Up close, her features were almost human. High cheekbones, full lips, a sharp jawline, but there was an otherworldly quality to her, something ethereal, unsettlingly perfect. Thin, bioluminescent lines, pulsed weakly along her collarbone, shifting with each breath. He reached out hesitantly, pressing 2 fingers to the side of her throat. A pulse, faint but there. Gabrielle sighed. Shit. He should leave her. This wasn't his problem. He didn't owe her anything. But as he pulled his hand away, her fingers twitched, just barely, and brushed against his wrist. A shock ran through him. Not pain, not fear, something else. For a split second, an image flashed through his mind. Not his own. A vast, burning sky, a ship falling through the clouds, pain, desperation, cold, so much cold. He yanked his hand back, his breathing ragged. She didn't move again. Gabriel clenched his jaw, shaking off whatever the hell that was. His instinct screamed at him to leave, to walk away, before he got involved in something bigger than himself. But he had spent too many years watching people die. Muttering a string of curses, he scooped her up and carried her into the tent. She barely weighed anything, her body unnaturally cool against his arms. He laid her down on the thickest blanket he had, then grabbed his spare thermal and wrapped it around her. The fire was burning low, so he stoked it, feeding it more scraps of wood. The small tent barely had room for 2, but he made do. Kneeling beside her, he studied her face again. Her expression was slack, peaceful in a way that made her seem almost fragile. Gabriel let out a slow breath and ran a hand down his face. Tomorrow he'd have questions. But tonight, he'd make sure she didn't die. Gabriel woke to the unmistakable sensation of danger. Years of surviving in the wasteland had trained his instincts to react before his mind fully caught up. The moment he felt movement near him, his hand shot toward his knife, fingers wrapping around the worn hilt as he prepared to strike. Then cold steel touched his throat. He froze. The alien was awake. She moved like a wounded animal, sharp, desperate. Her violet skin was flushed, her breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps. Despite her obvious weakness, her hand was steady, pressing a blade, his own knife, he realized, against the vulnerable hollow beneath his jaw. Her eyes, deep and luminous, locked onto his. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sounds in the tent were the soft flicker of the fire and the distant howling wind outside. Gabriel could feel her pulse hammering through the blade's grip, the faintest tremor betraying her exhaustion. "Easy," he murmured, voice low and calm. "You try to kill me, and you'll freeze to death before you make it out of here." She didn't answer. Her expression remained unreadable, but her gaze flicked to the entrance of the tent, scanning for an escape. Her muscles tensed, as if she were preparing to make a run for it. Gabriel slowly lifted his free hand, palm open. "I pulled you out of the cold. If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have bothered." Still, she didn't lower the knife. Gabriel held her gaze, measuring her. She was running on fumes. The way her arms shook, the way she had to brace herself just to stay upright, she was running on nothing but adrenaline. The moment it wore off, she'd crash. And she knew it. Finally, with a sharp inhale, she let go. The knife clattered against the ground as she collapsed back onto the blankets, her body too drained to keep up the fight. Gabriel exhaled through his nose, rubbing the spot on his throat where the blade had been. Hell of a way to say thank you. She didn't respond. Instead, she pulled the thermal blanket tighter around herself, retreating into silence. Her breathing was uneven, her exhaustion weighing her down like a lead weight. Gabriel took the knife and slid it back into its sheath, deciding not to push his luck. Outside, the storm hadn't let up. Wind rattled the tent, carrying the eerie sound of shifting debris from the ruins in the distance. It was the kind of night where even scavengers didn't risk travel. They were stuck here for a while. Gabriel reached for the canteen and placed it near her, along with a small metal container filled with what little broth he had left. "Drink, eat. If you pass out again, I'm not wasting another fire trying to thaw you out." She hesitated, then took the canteen, sniffing the water before sipping. Cautious, careful, like she expected poison. He watched her out of the corner of his eye as he turned his attention to his gear, checking his rifle, making sure everything was in working order. She was still a wild card. He didn't know why she was here, didn't know if others were looking for her, and that meant he had to stay on guard. For the next hour, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows against the tent walls. She finished the broth in slow, measured sips, her eyes occasionally darting toward him as if trying to decide whether he was a threat or not. He wasn't sure if she came to a conclusion. When she finally set the container down, she sat up straighter, pressing her back against the tent wall. Then, for the first time since she had woken up, she spoke. Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, something hardened by experience. "Who are you?" Gabriel didn't look up from his rifle. "Shouldn't I be the one asking that?" She didn't react, just stared at him, waiting. With a sigh, he set the weapon aside and leaned back against his pack. "Gabriel, used to be a soldier. Doesn't mean much anymore." She studied him for a moment. "You are alone?" A pause. Then, what? That was the question, wasn't it? Gabriel's fingers idly traced the old military patch still sewn into the inside of his jacket. He had stopped thinking about the answer a long time ago. "Same reason everyone else is," he said finally. "War, bad decisions, doesn't really matter." She didn't press. Silence settled between them again, heavier this time. Gabriel reached for his coat, draping it over himself as he shifted into a more comfortable position. "Storm's not letting up tonight. Get some rest." She didn't move, still watching him. "You are not afraid of me." It wasn't a question. Gabriel huffed. "Should I be?" She tilted her head slightly, considering. "Most humans would be." He met her gaze. "Most humans haven't been through what I have." Whatever she saw in his expression, it seemed to satisfy her. She finally eased back down, pulling the blanket over herself. Gabriel didn't sleep for a long time. Tomorrow he'd have more questions. And, if he was lucky, some answers. The fire had dwindled to a low smolder, sending thin curls of smoke into the cold night air. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving behind an eerie silence that made Gabriel's ears ring. He had grown used to the noise of the wasteland, the ceaseless howling of storms, the distant echoes of crumbling ruins shifting in the night. But silence? Silence felt unnatural. Silence meant something was waiting. He sat with his back against the tent wall, knife resting loosely in his grip, gaze flicking toward the alien woman lying across from him. Alira. She was still wrapped tightly in his spare thermal blanket, her violet skin barely visible beneath the layers. She wasn't unconscious anymore. She was awake. And watching him. Gabriel met her gaze without flinching. Her eyes, deep shifting shades of violet, reflected the dim firelight like polished glass. He wasn't sure how long she had been studying him, but she didn't look away now that he had caught her. There was something different about the way she observed him. Less suspicion than before, more curiosity. "How long?" Her voice was quiet, rough from disuse. Gabriel arched an eyebrow. "How long what?" "Since you found me." "A few hours," he said, shifting slightly. "Dragged you in here before the storm could finish the job." Alira exhaled through her nose, a short, almost disbelieving sound. She glanced at the fire, then back at him. "Why?" Gabriel frowned. "Because you were dying?" She studied him for a moment before shaking her head slightly. "That is not a reason," he scoffed. "It's the only one you're getting." Alira didn't seem satisfied with that answer, but she didn't press. Instead, she slowly pushed herself up onto her elbows, wincing as her body protested the movement. Gabriel didn't move to help. She was stubborn, and "You have a name?" he asked, breaking the silence. She blinked, tilting her head slightly as if the question surprised her. "Leila," she said finally, pronouncing it carefully. The syllables had a strange, melodic cadence to them, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. Gabriel nodded. Gabrielle. Elira's gaze flicked over him again, as if measuring the name against the man in front of her. It suits you. He huffed a quiet laugh. That's supposed to mean something? A small, almost imperceptible twitch of her lips. Perhaps. Gabriel wasn't sure how to take that, so he let it slide. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, and watched as she carefully adjusted her position. Her movements were deliberate, slow, like someone used to injury and determined not to show weakness. He recognized that. You weren't supposed to be here, were you? He asked. Elira hesitated. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the blanket. My ship crashed, she said after a moment. Gabriel nodded. He had suspected as much, but there was more to it, something she wasn't saying. Where? She exhaled, her breath slightly unsteady. Not far. But it's gone now, buried under ice and debris. Gabriel watched her carefully. She was telling the truth, but there was a weight in her voice, a hollowness. That ship hadn't just been her way off this planet, it had been something more. Anyone else survive? He asked. Elira's expression didn't change, but he caught the faintest flicker in her eyes, a flash of something, grief, maybe? No. Gabriel didn't push. He recognized that tone. It was the sound of someone forcing themselves not to feel. Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. The fire cracked, spitting embers onto the dirt floor. Elira finally looked away, her gaze dropping to her hands. They thought I was dead, she said softly. Gabriel frowned. Who? She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter, almost reluctant. My people. Something in the way she said it made Gabriel's stomach tighten. They left you, he said, more statement than question. Elia's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Gabriel exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down his face. That makes two of us, then. Ayla looked at him again, this time with something different in her expression, not curiosity, not suspicion, something deeper. You were left behind? Gabriel didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to talking about it. People didn't ask, and he didn't offer. But for some reason, with her, the words didn't feel as heavy. War happened, he said simply. I fought in it. When it ended, there wasn't much left of my unit, and by the time the ships were leaving, I figured it didn't matter if I got on one or not. Ealer was quiet for a long moment. I didn't think humans could be abandoned too, she murmured. Gabriel let out a short, humorless laugh. We're not so different. Elira's gaze lingered on him, her violet eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, she reached for the canteen he had left near her. Her fingers brushed against his as she took it. A faint warmth passed between them. It wasn't just the fire. Not just body heat. Something else, something unspoken. She took a slow sip of water, her movements no longer as stiff, no longer as wary. For the first time since she had woken up, she didn't look like she was preparing to run. Gabriel leaned back against the tent wall, watching her settle against the blankets. He knew this didn't change anything. Tomorrow there would still be questions, still be danger. But tonight they weren't just two survivors thrown together by chance. Tonight they were something else. Something closer. The fire had been built higher than usual, its warmth pushing back the lingering cold that clung to the air inside the tent. Outside, the world was still wrapped in the kind of deep, lifeless silence that only came after a storm. The snow had buried much of the wasteland, blanketing the ruins and jagged rock formations in an unnatural stillness. It wouldn't last. Nothing ever did out here. Gabriel shifted, rolling his shoulders as he stirred the small pot he had balanced over the flames. The scent of roasted meat and simmering broth filled the space, mingling with the faint traces of smoke. It wasn't much. Some dried rations, a bit of scavenged root vegetables, and the last of the meat from his last successful hunt, but it was warm, filling, and better than starving. Across from him, Elira sat curled beneath the thermal blanket, watching him with the same quiet intensity she always had. She had recovered some of her strength over the past day, but she was still visibly drained, her movements slower, her body not yet fully trusting itself. He noticed how her fingers occasionally clenched around the edge of the blanket, how she would exhale just a little too deliberately, as if testing her lung. She was still trying to figure him out, and he couldn't blame her. "You eat meat?" he asked, breaking the silence as he ladled some of the stew into a battered metal bowl. Elira's expression didn't change, but something in her gaze sharpened. "Yes, but not whatever that is." Gabriel smirked. "Relax, it's not poison, just snow hare." "Couldn't find anything better." He held out the bowl. She hesitated for only a moment before accepting it. The way she gripped it told him more than she probably intended. She was hungry, starving, really. He watched as she brought the bowl closer, inhaling the steam before taking a slow, deliberate bite. The moment the food touched her tongue, something in her expression shifted. Just slightly, just enough for him to notice. Her eyes flicked to his for half a second before she looked away, focusing on her meal. "You're not used to bad food," he noted, taking a bite from his own portion. Elira swallowed, her jaw tightening slightly. "I've had worse." Gabrielle raised an eyebrow. "That bad?" She shook her head, her voice softer this time. "No, this is warm." Something about the way she said it made Gabriel pause. Warm. Not good, not satisfying, just warm, like she hadn't had that in a long time. Maybe ever. The thought sat heavier than it should have. They ate in relative silence, the crackling fire filling the gaps between words neither of them seemed in a rush to say. The food did its job, loosening the stiffness in Elira's posture, bringing a faint flush to her skin where the cold had drained her color. At some point, she set the bowl down beside her and shifted, letting one arm slip free of the blanket as she stretched her fingers toward the fire. The glow reflected off her violet skin, tracing the faint bioluminescent lines along her forearm. Gabriel found himself watching, caught by the way the light made her look less alien and more... She noticed. "You stare a lot," she murmured. Gabrielle didn't look away. "You're hard not to look at." Aila's lips twitched, something like amusement flickering across her face before she exhaled, rolling her shoulders. "It's strange," she said after a moment. "What is?" She flexed her fingers, watching the movement as if testing their strength. "Sitting like this, sharing food, talking." Her voice dipped slightly, her expression unreadable. "It's human." Gabriel's brow furrowed. "You don't do this with your own people?" Elira hesitated, then shook her head. "Not like this." He watched her for a moment before setting his empty bowl aside. His movements were slower than usual, measured, as if he were handling something delicate. And maybe he was. "Must been lonely," he said finally. Elira looked at him then, really looked at him. The flickering fire reflected in her violet eyes, and for the first time she seemed unguarded, vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that came when words weren't enough. Gabriel leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. "You said they left you behind," he murmured. "Your people." Elira's fingers curled slightly against the fabric of the blanket. "Yes." "Well," her jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer, but then she sighed, shaking her head. "I was an inconvenience, a liability." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Dead weight." Gabriel frowned. "That why you fought so hard when you woke up?" Elira let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "You would too if you thought you were nothing more than someone else's mistake." Gabriel didn't break eye contact. "You're not a mistake." She blinked, caught off guard by the certainty in his voice. For a moment she looked like she wanted to argue, to push back, but she didn't. Instead, she slowly reached for her empty bowl, turning it in her hands as if the movement steadied her. "You're strange," she said, her voice quieter now. Gabriel smirked. "So I've been told." Illyra exhaled, shaking her head slightly, but the tension in her shoulders had eased. The sharpness in her expression had dulled, replaced by something softer, something uncertain. He wasn't sure what made him do it. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him just now, or maybe it was the fact that for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely alone. But he reached out. His fingers brushed against hers. It was barely a touch, just a brief, fleeting point of contact, but it was enough. Enough for Illyra to still, enough for her breath to catch just slightly. Gabriel didn't pull away. Neither did she. For a long, fragile moment, they just sat there, the fire flickering between them, the warmth sinking into their skin, chasing away the cold. Gabriel finally exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not alone, Illyra." Her fingers twitched beneath his, but she didn't move. Didn't speak. And that, he realized, was answer enough. The fire had burned low, casting restless shadows against the tent walls. Outside, the wasteland lay still beneath a thick blanket of snow, the silence pressing in like a heavy weight. The wind had died down, leaving only the occasional creak of ice shifting in the cold. Gabriel sat by the fire, his hands loosely gripping his knife, though he hadn't sharpened it in a while. His instincts told him something was wrong, had been wrong for hours now. He could feel it in the air, in the way Illyra sat too still, too quiet, her gaze locked on the entrance of the tent as if she were waiting for something, or deciding something. "You've been quiet," he finally said, his voice low but firm. Illyra didn't turn to look at him. "So have you." Gabriel exhaled slowly. He had given her space, let her have her silence, but the tension in the air was getting heavier, more unbearable with every passing minute. "Something on your mind?" he pressed. Illyra hesitated, then pulled the thermal blanket tighter around herself. "I should leave." Gabriel stilled. The knife in his hands froze mid-spin, the firelight glinting off its worn edge. He turned toward her slowly. "What?" She swallowed hard, but kept her eyes on the tent flap. "I shouldn't be here, Gabriel. I should have left the moment I was strong enough." His jaw tightened. "You don't believe that." Illyra exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is that if I stay, you'll die." Gabriel clenched his fists, the leather of his gloves creaking under the pressure. "You think I don't know the risks? I've been surviving out here long before you showed up." "You don't understand," Illyra said, her voice rising slightly. She finally turned to look at him, and there was something raw, almost desperate in her eyes. "You think this is just another fight? Another group of people you can outrun or outgun?" She let out a bitter laugh. "They don't lose people, Gabriel. If they want to find me, they will. And when they do, they won't hesitate." "Then let them come," he said, standing. "I'm not afraid of them." Illyra stood abruptly, her movements sharp with frustration. "You should be." Gabriel took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Then tell me why. Tell me what they'll do, because all I'm hearing is you trying to run from something that hasn't even happened yet." Her breath hitched slightly, her fingers trembling at her sides. "They will erase me, Gabriel," she said, quieter this time. "Completely, and anyone connected to me. It won't be a war, it won't be a fight. It will be as if I never existed." The words hung between them, heavier than the silence before. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "And you think leaving is going to stop them?" She flinched, just barely, but he saw it. "You're scared," he said, voice softer now, "and I get it, but don't pretend like this is about protecting me. You're running because you don't think you deserve to be saved." Illyra inhaled sharply, stepping back. "That's not—" "It is," he cut in. "You keep saying they left you, that they discarded you, but you're still acting like they own you." Like you don't get to decide what happens next." Elira's breath was uneven now, her violet eyes flickering with something uncertain, something vulnerable. Gabriel took another step forward, slow and deliberate. "You survived," he said. "You made it. That means something. It means you get to choose." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She looked away, blinking rapidly, as if trying to hold back something too big to name. Gabriel reached out, hesitating for half a second before gently wrapping his fingers around her wrist. She didn't pull away. "You don't have to do this alone," he murmured. "Not anymore." Elira closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she might break, might let herself believe him. But then she shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "If I stay, they will come. I won't let them take you too." Gabriel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Damn it, Elira." She took another step back, and his chest tightened with the realization of what was about to happen. She was going to leave, and he couldn't let her. Without thinking, he reached out and grabbed her hand, pulling her back toward him. The motion was sudden, instinctive, and for a second they were impossibly close, so close he could see the way the firelight danced across her skin, the way her breath trembled in the space between them. Elira's fingers curled slightly around his, as if torn between holding on and letting go. "Gabriel." He shook his head. "Don't." Her lips parted, but whatever she was going to say disappeared when he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing lightly against her skin. For the first time, she didn't flinch from his touch. "You're not alone," he whispered. Something in her expression cracked, something she had been holding together for too long. And then, before he could think, before either of them could stop it, she closed the distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, like neither of them were sure they were allowed to do this. But then Elira let out a shaky breath against his lips, and something in both of them shattered. Gabriel pulled her closer, his hand sliding to the small of her back as her fingers tangled in the fabric of his jacket. She pressed into him as if trying to memorize the warmth, the shape of him, as if convincing herself this was real. It was real. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Gabriel wasn't thinking about survival, wasn't thinking about the past or the future. Just this, just her. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested together, breath mixing in the cold air. Elira's hands were still gripping his jacket as if she wasn't ready to let go. Gabriel exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stay." Elira swallowed hard, and for the first time, she didn't argue. She just nodded. The fire crackled softly, casting golden light across the tense fabric. Outside, the wasteland lay silent beneath a thick layer of snow, the cold, biting, and absolute. The storm had passed, leaving behind an unsettling stillness, one that Gabriel couldn't quite shake. He sat with his back against a stack of supplies, sharpening his knife out of habit rather than necessity. The rhythmic scrape of metal against stone was the only sound in the tent besides Elira's slow, measured breaths. She sat across from him, legs folded beneath her, arms loosely wrapped around herself. She had stayed. That alone should have been enough to settle him, but something still felt off. Gabriel glanced up at her, studying the way the firelight flickered across her violet skin. She looked different tonight, not just exhausted, but lost, as if her mind was somewhere far beyond the confines of this tent. "You regret staying?" he asked, voice low. Elira blinked, drawn out of whatever thoughts had consumed her. Her gaze met his, and for a second something flickered in her expression, something unreadable. Then she shook her head. "No," she said softly. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" Elira hesitated. "I don't regret staying," she clarified. "I regret that I want to." That made him pause. He set the knife down, leaning forward slightly. "Explain." She exhaled slowly, eyes dropping to the fire. Wanting something is dangerous, she murmured. It makes you weak, makes you easy to control. She let out a hollow laugh. My people taught me that lesson well. Gabrielle studied her for a long moment. That why you tried to leave? Ilera nodded, fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket draped over her shoulders. I told myself I didn't need this. Didn't need you. She swallowed hard. But when I tried to walk away, I realized that was a lie. Gabriel's chest tightened. He should have said something. Should have reassured her that wanting wasn't weakness, that she wasn't alone anymore. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he reached forward, carefully, deliberately. His fingers brushed against hers, a barely there touch, hesitant but warm. Ilera tensed for half a second before exhaling and letting her hand relax beneath his. I don't want to be afraid anymore, she whispered. Gabriel squeezed her hand gently. Then, don't be. Ilera looked up at him, something raw in her expression. It's not that easy. I know, he said, but you're not doing this alone. She searched his face, as if looking for proof that he really meant it. Then slowly she nodded. For a while they just sat there, hands loosely intertwined, the fire crackling between them. The tension that had weighed so heavily on the air seemed to lift, replaced by something softer, something unspoken. Then, as if drawn by an unseen force, Ilera leaned forward. Just slightly, just enough for her breath to mingle with his in the space between them. Gabriel didn't move, didn't pull away, didn't even breathe. Her eyes flickered down to his lips for a fraction of a second, and something inside him snapped. He reached up, cupping her face gently, his thumb tracing the sharp line of her cheekbone. Ilera inhaled sharply, but she didn't stop him. And then, finally, she closed the distance. The kiss was hesitant at first, soft, searching, as if neither of them were sure this was real, but the moment Ilera exhaled against him, something in both of them gave in. Gabriel pulled her closer, his hand sliding to the back of her neck as she melted against him. Her fingers gripped the front of his shirt, holding on as if anchoring herself. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a breaking point. For both of them. Ilera made a small, desperate noise against his lips, and Gabriel deepened the kiss in response, tilting his head to taste more of her. She was warm, impossibly warm, and he never wanted to let go. But eventually they had to breathe. They pulled apart just slightly, foreheads resting together, breath mingling in the cold air. Gabriel's hands were still on her, one against her cheek, the other curled around her waist. Ilera's fingers remained tangled in his jacket. Neither of them moved. Neither of them wanted to move. Gabriel swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. Still regret staying? Ilera let out a shaky breath, a faint, almost smile touching her lips. No? Gabriel exhaled, thumb brushing against her cheek. Good. For a long, lingering moment, the world outside didn't exist. There was no war, no past, no impending threat. Just this. Just them. And then the fire flickered. The wind outside shifted. And far in the distance, barely audible over the crackle of embers, a low, mechanical hum. Ilera stiffened. Gabriel felt it too. Something just changed. The air was different. The night wasn't quiet anymore. Ilera turned her head slightly, listening, her pupils dilated and her breath caught. Then, barely above a whisper, they found us. Ilera moved toward the entrance of the tent, pressing a hand against the fabric as if feeling for something unseen. Her breath hitched. Drones, she whispered. At least 2, maybe 3. Gabriel cursed under his breath. How far? Ilera shook her head. Close. They'll be scanning for heat signatures. If they haven't locked onto us yet, they will soon. Gabriel glanced at the fire. Damn it. Even though it was dying, the residual heat would still be enough to show up on a thermal scan. We need to move, he said. Now. Elira didn't argue. Gabriel grabbed his pack, slinging his rifle over his shoulder, and moved swiftly to douse what was left of the fire. Elira was already at the back of the tent, peeling open a hidden seam he hadn't noticed before. "You had a second exit?" he asked. She shot him a sharp look. "You didn't?" Gabriel huffed, shaking his head. "Remind me to be more paranoid." They slipped out into the night, the cold air hitting them like a blade. Gabriel pulled his scarf up over his mouth, his boots crunching softly in the snow as they moved. Elira moved like a shadow, her steps nearly silent as she led the way toward a cluster of jagged ice formations nearby. The hum of the drones was getting louder. Gabriel risked a glance over his shoulder, and his stomach dropped. Two hovering figures, sleek and insect-like, their metal exteriors reflecting the pale light of the moon. They were scanning, shifting, their glowing red sensors sweeping across the landscape, searching. One of them turned slightly, right toward the tent. Gabriel grabbed Elira's arm and pulled her down behind a low ridge of ice. "Go," he whispered. They moved quickly, ducking low, weaving between the natural cover the terrain provided. The snow was slowing them down, but Gabriel kept his pace steady, his rifle at the ready. If they had to fight, he'd make damn sure he got the first shot. Elira was breathing hard, her eyes darting between the drones and their path ahead. "If we can get to the ridge, we might be able to lose them." "Might," Gabriel muttered. "Great odds." Elira shot him a look, but didn't reply. The drones shifted again, their red lights flashing in a new pattern, and then a sharp, high-pitched ping. Gabriel knew what that meant before Elira even spoke. "They've locked onto us." A bright beam of red light cut through the darkness, sweeping over the ice, searching. They had seconds, maybe less. Gabriel didn't think, he reacted. Raw. They broke into a sprint. The ice crunched beneath them as they dashed toward the ridge, the hum of the drones now roaring in their ears. Elira was fast, faster than he expected. Her movements precise, calculated, even in panic. Gabriel kept close, rifle in his grip, heart pounding. A sudden blast of energy tore through the ice behind them, sending shards flying into the air. Gabriel felt the heat of it against his back, the force of the impact nearly knocking him off balance. "Shit! They're trying to drive us into the open," Elira shouted. Gabriel gritted his teeth. Not happening. They reached the ridge, skidding to a stop behind a thick outcrop of ice. Gabriel pressed his back against it, breathing hard. Elira crouched beside him, eyes flicking upward. The drones were circling now, scanning, waiting. Gabriel glanced at her. "You got a plan?" Elira wiped the snow from her face, her mind racing. "We have to disable them. If they transmit our location, we won't just be dealing with drones, we'll be dealing with a recovery team." Gabriel exhaled sharply. "Of course there's a recovery team. I can take out their scanners," Elira said, pulling a small, sleek device from inside her jacket. Gabriel didn't recognize it, but from the way she handled it, she did. "Yump," he guessed. Elira nodded. "Short range, we need them closer." Gabriel smirked, gripping his rifle tighter. "I can manage that." Before she could argue, he moved, stepping out from behind cover and firing. The first shot slammed into one of the drones, sending sparks flying. It veered to the side, its sensors flickering wildly. The second drone responded instantly, turning and unleashing a pulse blast in his direction. Gabriel dove back behind the ice as the ground where he'd stood exploded in a burst of red-hot energy. "Gabriel!" Elira hissed. "Any time now," he shouted. Elira sprang into motion, raising the device. It pulsed with a faint blue glow before releasing a sudden wave of energy. The air crackled. The nearest drone let out a high-pitched whine before its sensors fizzled out. Then it dropped, crashing hard into the snow. The second drone faltered, struggling to compensate. Gabriel didn't give it the chance. One clean shot, right through the core. The drone exploded, raining molten metal into the snow. For a moment everything was silent except for the sound of their breathing. Then, Alara turned to him. "We need to go, now." Gabriel didn't argue. They took off again, moving deeper into the ice fields. As they ran, Alara's voice was tight, urgent. "The signal went out before the EMP hit. They know where we are." Gabriel exhaled sharply. "How much time do we have?" Alara swallowed hard. "Not enough." Far behind them, the night sky lit up, a glowing blue streak cutting through the darkness. A ship. The ship had descended like a hunting beast, its massive thrusters kicking up a whirlwind of snow and ice. It loomed over the frozen wasteland like a specter of death, its sleek black hull gleaming beneath the moonlight. Gabriel's grip on his rifle tightened as he watched the enemy disembark. 6 figures emerged, moving in perfect formation. Their exosuits were bulkier than the soldiers they had fought before, the armor reinforced with kinetic plating, glowing in places where energy pulses flickered beneath the surface. These weren't just foot soldiers. These were assassins. But one of them stood apart, taller, more menacing. He didn't wear a helmet like the others. His face was sharp, angular, marked with battle scars and the insignia of command. A deep black mantle draped from his shoulders. His silver eyes locked onto Alara as he stepped forward with slow, deliberate movements. Gabriel felt Alara tense beside him. "Who the hell is that?" Gabriel murmured. Alara didn't answer immediately. Her fingers twitched around her weapon, and when she finally spoke, her voice was cold. "Commander Rathos." Gabriel's stomach twisted. She knew him. And from the way Rathos looked at her, this was personal. Rathos stopped a few meters ahead of his troops, folding his hands behind his back as he regarded Alara like one might observe an insect struggling beneath a boot. "Alara Virkai," he said, voice smooth but laced with amusement. "You should have died when we left you behind." Alara's jaw tightened. "You should have made sure I was dead." Rathos smirked. "A mistake I will soon correct." Gabriel raised his rifle, stepping slightly in front of Alara. "Not happening." Rathos turned his gaze toward him for the first time, studying him like a curiosity. "A human?" A low chuckle. "Strange company you keep, Alara." Gabriel didn't lower his weapon. Last chance to walk away. Rathos smiled and lifted his hand. Engage. The freezing air burned in Gabriel's lungs as he sprinted toward the ship, his boots crunching against the ice. Plasma bolts shrieked past his head, exploding against the frozen ground in bursts of blinding energy. Every step felt like running through a war zone, because that's exactly what this was. Behind him, Alara fought like a demon. She moved fast, her pulse rifle kicking with precision shots, every round hitting an exposed joint or a visor. A blast of energy struck the ice near her feet, but she twisted away just in time, rolling into cover before returning fire. Gabriel didn't stop. He could see the ship's power relay glowing a faint blue on the side of the hull. That was their way out. But the enemy wasn't stupid. They saw what he was doing. "Focus fire on the human," Rathos barked, his voice like a whip crack through the battlefield. The remaining 3 soldiers shifted, their attention snapping toward Gabriel. "Damn it," Gabriel hissed. The first shot grazed his shoulder, sending a jolt of pain down his arm. He staggered but kept moving, diving behind a jagged ice formation just as another round melted a hole in the ridge beside him. He was outgunned, outnumbered. But he wasn't alone. Alara saw the shift. Her heart pounded as she assessed the battlefield in an instant. Gabriel was pinned, but if he didn't reach that relay, they were both dead. "Time to play dirty," she muttered. With a quick flick of her wrist, she activated her cloaking field, her body blurring into the environment. It wouldn't last long, maybe 10 seconds, tops, but it was enough. She moved. One of the enemy soldiers turned, scanning for her. Too late. Alara appeared behind him, plunging her knife into the soft joint at his spine. The soldier let out a garbled cry, collapsing forward. The second soldier pivoted toward the noise, but Alira was already moving. She twisted around him, using his own bulk as a shield against incoming fire. Gabriel saw his chance. While the enemy was distracted, he broke into a full sprint toward the relay. He yanked a detonator from his belt, slapped it onto the exposed panel, and a brutal impact slammed into his ribs. The world tilted sideways as Gabriel was sent flying, crashing hard into the snow. His vision blurred, pain flaring through his side. His fingers scrambled for his rifle, but a heavy boot pinned his arm down. Rathos? The commander loomed over him, his gauntlet crackling with energy. His silver eyes were filled with contempt. "You are an insignificant speck," Rathos sneered, pressing down harder. Gabriel gritted his teeth against the pain. Rathos raised his energy blade, the violet glow reflecting in Gabriel's eyes. "This is the part," he said smoothly, "where you die." Then Alira screamed. "No!" Rathos hesitated a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Gabriel struck. Using every ounce of strength he had left, he kicked out his leg, slamming Rathos off balance. The commander stumbled, and Gabriel ripped his arm free, grabbing his sidearm, and but the gun fired point-blank into Rathos's side, the force sending him crashing onto the ice. Gabriel coughed, rolling onto his knees. His whole body ached, but he didn't stop. He forced himself up, turning toward the ship. The detonator was still armed. "Alira, now!" he shouted. Alira didn't hesitate. She lunged for Gabriel, wrapping her arms around him just as the explosion erupted. The blast waves slammed into them, sending them tumbling across the ice. The enemy ship shuddered violently, sparks and fire bursting from its hull. The engines whined, trying to compensate, and failed. A deafening boom split the air as the entire side of the ship blew outward, flames engulfing the landing bay. The massive craft lurched, its thrusters flickering, and then it collapsed. Metal screamed as the ship tilted, crashing onto the ice with a thunderous impact. The ground shook, a shock wave rippling outward, sending chunks of ice and debris flying. Gabriel shielded Alira, his arms tightening around her as fire and smoke billowed into the night sky. The storm of destruction settled. Silence. Gabriel breathed hard, the scent of burnt metal thick in the air. Alira lifted her head, her body still trembling. "It's over," she whispered. Gabriel let out a shaky laugh, tilting his head back against the ice. "Yeah," he panted, "it damn well better be." The wreckage of the ship still burned, its once mighty form now nothing more than twisted metal and smoldering ruins. Gabriel and Alira stood at the edge of the destruction, their breath still uneven, their bodies aching. They had won. Rathos and his soldiers were gone. The ship was beyond repair. And now, they were truly free. Alira exhaled, looking up at the sky, clear, open, endless. For the first time, there was no fear, no shadow of pursuit. Just possibility. Gabriel let out a soft chuckle, rubbing his sore ribs. "So, what now?" Alira turned to him, violet eyes searching his face. "We could go anywhere," she murmured. Gabriel smirked. "Yeah? You got anywhere in mind?" She hesitated just for a second, then, slowly, she reached for his hand. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He took it, fingers intertwining. Alira's expression softened. "Wherever we go," she said quietly, "we go together." Gabriel smiled. "Damn right." With the stars above and the wasteland behind, they stepped forward into the unknown. The sun was warm. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Alira let it sink into her skin. No frozen winds tearing at her, no harsh nights spent running, no fear of what lay in the darkness. Only warmth. The air smelled different here, clean, untouched, as if this hidden valley had been waiting for them all along. the scent of wildflowers and damp earth mixed with the rustling of towering trees, the quiet symphony of the breeze whispering through the leaves. A nearby stream murmured its steady, soothing song, water tumbling over smooth stones. Elira stretched out on the grass, letting herself breathe, really breathe. The tension in her body, the ever-present coil of wariness, was unraveling, slowly, tentatively, as if her mind still didn't quite trust what her body was feeling. Gabriel lay beside her, one arm tucked beneath his head, the other resting against his chest. His shirt was open, exposing his tanned skin, the ridges of muscle traced with the scars of battles survived. They had won. And now they had this. She turned her head slightly, watching as Gabriel squinted up at the sky, his lips curving into that familiar smirk. "You look like you're about to start overthinking again," he murmured. Elira arched an eyebrow. "You think I ever stop?" Gabriel chuckled, low and warm. "Fair point." They had been here for days now, hidden away from the world, from the ruins they had left behind. The valley stretched wide and endless around them, untouched by war. It felt too perfect. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Elira admitted. Gabriel turned his head toward her, studying her face. His gaze was steady, unshaken. "Nothing's going to go wrong," he said simply. Elira exhaled a soft laugh. "You don't know that." Gabriel rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow. He reached out, fingers barely grazing the skin of her arm. The touch was light, intentional. Elira shivered, but not from cold. Gabriel had always been careful with her, always measured, always waiting to see if she would pull away. But now, she didn't want to pull away. She turned onto her side to face him, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the steady rise and fall of his breath. "So this is it," she murmured. "We just start over?" Gabriel's fingers trailed from her jaw down to her collarbone, lingering there for a moment before tucking a strand of her silvery white hair behind her ear. "Sounds nice, doesn't it?" Elira's breath was shallow. "Too nice." Gabriel smirked. "Would it help if I picked a fight with you? Give you something to stress about?" Elira let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "No, I think I've had enough of fighting for a while." Gabriel's smirk faded into something softer. "More real?" His fingers drifted from her cheek to her waist, his thumb tracing slow, idle circles against her skin. His touch was unhurried, reverent, as if he was memorizing her. Elira's breath hitched. Her own hand found its way to his chest, her fingers spreading over the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat. Warm, solid, alive. She had almost lost this. Had almost lost him. Gabriel must have seen something in her expression because he reached up, cupping her face. "Hey," he murmured. "We're here. We made it." Ela swallowed hard. For so long, her survival had been about running, but now she wasn't running anymore. She was here, with him, and she wanted to feel it. She leaned in, and Gabriel didn't hesitate. His lips met hers, slow, warm, and unhurried. Elira responded without thinking, without fear, her hands sliding over his shoulders, nails pressing lightly into his skin. Gabriel groaned softly, his grip tightening on her waist, pulling her against him. His warmth, his scent, the quiet hunger in his touch. It surrounded her, consumed her. And she let it. For the first time, she wanted more. Elira shifted, pressing Gabriel onto his back. His eyes darkened as she straddled him, her thighs bracketing his hips. Gabriel let out a slow breath, his hand settling on her waist. "Elira." She leaned down, kissing him again, deeper this time. Gabriel's hands tightened, fingers digging into her hips as he guided her against him. The friction sent a shudder through her, a slow, burning heat pooling in her stomach. She had never felt like this before. Never let herself have this before. Gabriel let her set the pace. He let her take what she wanted. Lyra gasped as his hands slid up her back, pressing her closer, their bodies aligning in a way that felt perfectly right. Gabriel groaned against her lips, rolling his hips upward, pulling her deeper into him. Lyra cried out, her breath stuttering, nails dragging down his chest. He was fire beneath her hands. Gabriel moved with her, matching her rhythm, his grip unrelenting yet achingly gentle, like he wanted to devour her but worship her at the same time. Lyra's head tipped back as she rocked against him, pleasure spiraling higher, hotter. Gabriel's breath was ragged, his hands holding her like she was something precious. And when she finally shattered, when pleasure broke over her like a tidal wave, she heard him whisper her name like a prayer. The sun had begun to dip beyond the treetops, casting long golden shadows across the valley. The warmth of the day still lingered, but the air had turned cooler, a soft breeze carrying the scent of earth and water. Lyra lay half-draped over Gabriel, her head resting against his chest, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He was tracing slow, idle circles along her back, fingers light and lazy, like he was simply enjoying the feel of her beneath his touch. "You're quiet," Gabriel murmured, voice low and satisfied. Lyra hummed, pressing a slow, lingering kiss against his collarbone. "I like the quiet." Gabriel exhaled a breathy laugh, pulling her closer. "Yeah?" She shifted against him, stretching like a lazy feline, completely at ease. Gabriel watched her with something soft, unreadable in his expression. He had never seen her like this before. Relaxed, unguarded, happy. He ran a hand through her silken hair, tucking a stray strand behind her ear. "I like this look on you." Lyra tilted her head. "What look?" Gabriel smirked. "The one where you actually look like you believe you deserve to be happy?" Lyra stilled, her fingers tightening slightly against his skin. Because he was right. For so long, she had believed that she was not meant to have this, that her life would be running, fighting, surviving, never living. But now she had him. Now she had a chance. Lyra swallowed hard, her eyes meeting his. "Maybe I'm starting to." Gabriel's expression softened. He reached up, trailing his knuckles down her cheek, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good." Lyra exhaled slowly. Then, without a word, she kissed him again. Slow, deep, meaningful. A promise. Gabriel smiled against her lips, pulling her down, pulling her in. And as the night settled around them, as the stars began to flicker to life overhead, Lyra finally let herself believe she was home.